How to sew palazzo pants with an elasticated waistband. A step-by-step tutorial with sewing pattern. Hi sewers, welcome to my studio. I'm Sasha, I'm a fashion designer and teacher, and today I have a short and sweet tutorial showing you how to make up my palazzo pants sewing pattern with an elasticated back as an alternative to the original drawstring option. If you'd like to sew along, you can find the pattern in my Etsy store and I'll pop the link down below. And as I'll be focusing on just the new elastic waistband option today, I'll also add the link to the original tutorial video that takes you through the rest of the project in lots of detail. Before we get started, there's 3 important things to note with this tutorial. Firstly, the type of elastic you choose is really important. It must be 1 to 1 1/4 inches wide, and the stretchier the better. Secondly, the same fabric suggestions apply as in the original instructions, but I would definitely stick towards the lighter end of the scale for the best results. So light to midweight cottons, soft linen, viscose challis, or chambray would all be great options for this project. I've used a silk noir for this checked pair, which I think works really well. And thirdly, and most importantly, unfortunately, this technique won't work for every body shape, as the elastic sits at the back of the waistband only and needs to be able to stretch wide enough for the trousers to be pulled on over the hips, then contract small enough to fit snugly at the waist. So rather than size, it's a matter of ratio, meaning if you have a very small waist in comparison to your hip measurement, then this technique might not be for you. You can test this out before starting the project by cutting a rectangle of fabric 18 inches long by 3 inches wide. I've used calico here, but any scrap of fabric will do as long as it's non-stretch. Then fold the fabric in half lengthwise and press the fold into place with your iron to make it feel a little bit more like the waistband on the trousers. Then take a long piece of 1 to 1 1/4 inch wide elastic and pin it to one end of your fabric. Then pin the other ends of the elastic and fabric together on your body and have a play around with the length of the elastic to see if you're able to get a snug fit at your waist while having enough stretch available to move up and down over your hips with ease. And if it doesn't work for your shape and you'd still love to make the trousers, please don't be too upset because the original drawstring option works for all body types. But I've had lots of requests asking how to construct the waistband with elastic only, so I wanted to make it available as an option for those that it will work for. So let's get into the tutorial. Materials needed for this project. To make the Starlight Palazzo Pants with an elasticated waistband, you'll need a length of 1 to 1 1/4 inch wide elastic that is 14 inches shorter than your waist measurement, and 2 safety pins. All other material requirements, fabric suggestions and notions can be found in the pattern instructions and are the same as the original project. Elasticated waistband step by step. To construct the main legs and pockets of the trousers, follow steps 1 to 11 in the original tutorial video linked below. Then head back here for the alternate instructions from step 12 onwards. Although most elements of the elastic waistband construction are the same as for the drawstring version in the original project, I'm going to go through this whole stage step by step to allow you to follow along from this point until the end without having to reference back and forth to the original video as you sew. First, take your waistband piece and iron your interfacing to the back of it. I've also added a second piece of interfacing 2 centimeters narrower than the waistband down the center of my piece to make mine extra strong. Then fold over the 2 longer edges of the waistband by 1 centimeter towards the inside of the piece and press into place with your iron. Now fold the waistband in half with the right side facing out, bringing the 2 folded edges to meet with a small gap of about 2 millimeters between them, and press the fold into shape with your iron. The small gap between the 2 folded edges is really important as it's key to finishing the waistband correctly later on. Then measure your waist and cut a length of 1 to 1 1/4 inch wide elastic to 14 inches shorter than your waist measurement. My waist is 28 inches, so I'm cutting my elastic length to 14 inches. The overlock stitch at the bottom here is just because I narrowed a wider piece of elastic. Then mark a chalk line 1¼ inches in from one end of the elastic and pin the elastic to one side of the waistband, matching the end of the waistband to the chalk mark. Then pin the other ends of the elastic and waistband together on your body to find the correct fit for your individual size. You want the waistband to fit as snugly as possible at your waist while having enough stretch available to move over your hips with ease. You might need to play around with this a little bit to find the right balance. When you're happy with the fit, carefully step out of the waistband, leaving the pins attached. Then bring the waistband onto the table and mark the point at which the waistband meets the end of the elastic you just pinned on your body with a chalk line. Unpin the elastic, then mark a second chalk line 1¼ inches away from the line you've just drawn towards the free end of the elastic. Then cut the excess elastic away along this second line and unpin the other end. So you will now have a single piece of elastic cut to your size with additional length at either end to allow for seam allowances. Then finally fold the elastic in half and cut it into 2 even pieces. Next, fold the top edge of the back of the trousers over by 1 centimetre towards the inside and press the fold into place with your iron. Then fold over towards the inside of the trousers again to make a second fold of 4 centimetres and press into place with your iron. So the back of the trousers should now look like this. Then bring your waistband onto the table so that the shorter side of the waistband is facing upwards and the longer side with the small lip that we pressed in earlier is sitting beneath it at the bottom. Then bring the trousers to sit beneath the waistband front side up and flip the waistband down onto the front of the trousers so that the shorter folded edge is laying right side together with the top edge of the front of the trousers. Then open the fold and pin the raw edges together, matching the notch in the middle to the crotch seam, the notches at the ends to the notches inside the pockets, and adding more pins in between as needed. Then sew into place along the fold in the waistband with a straight stitch with a length of 2.5, a 1 centimetre seam allowance and a back stitch at the beginning and the end. The waistband should now look like this when you flip it up. We're now going to attach our front and back waistbands at the side seam here. With both the front and back waistbands unfolded, flip the 2 sides together so the edges meet and the right sides are facing, then pin into place matching at the top and the notches. We're now going to sew them together from the top up until the stitch line on the front waistband here. So using a straight stitch with a length of 2.5, a 1 centimetre seam allowance and a back stitch at the beginning and the end. It should now look like this and like this from the front. Next, we'll attach the elastic into these seams. Take one of the 2 elastic pieces and place it over the lower half of the front waistband and pin it into place with an overlap of 2 centimetres. Sew the elastic down with a straight stitch as close as possible to the stitch line we just made for the side seam, with a back stitch at the beginning and the end. It should now look like this. Then take a safety pin and fix it securely to the free end of the elastic. And make a small snip into the seam allowance just in front of the side seam so the elastic can lay flat at a right angle, and repeat for the other side. We're now going to secure down the front waistband using a technique called stitch in the ditch, which means we'll sew from the front of the trousers, aiming for the stitches to fall in the ditch at the join between the top of the trousers and the waistband, while at the same time catching the lower edge of the back of the waistband with the stitches and fixing it into place, which is where the small gap we made when prepping the waistband earlier becomes really important to getting a neat finish. Make sure the front waistband is laying nice and flat from the outside, and pin into place starting in the middle close to the bottom of the waistband. Then add plenty of pins along the rest of the front waistband, making sure the tops of the pockets are tucked in nicely at the sides. Starting at the beginning of the pocket opening with a back stitch, use a straight stitch to sew as close as possible into the ditch at the bottom of the waistband. This can be a little tricky to get the hang of, so take your time, especially if this is a new technique for you. When you get to the end of the other pocket opening, end with a back stitch. It should now look like this, and like this from the back, with the stitches just a couple of millimetres in from the folded edge at the bottom of the waistband. We're now going to secure the elastic firmly into the side seam of the waistband by flipping the back waistband over the front waistband to reveal the side seam, then sewing through all the layers together as close as possible to the first line of stitches. Then flip the back waistband back over the elastic so it looks like this. Pin the back waistband down into place by first matching up the seam at the centre back and then making sure the end of the pocket and the elastic are tucked in nicely at the sides. It helps to mark the bottom of the 1 cm seam allowance at the top of the pocket with chalk to give you a guide to follow when tucking. Take care to tuck in all the layers neatly and that everything is laying nice and flat so it looks like this, and pin along the length of the rest of the waistband. Then at the centre back, make a pair of chalk marker points onto the fold, 2 cm away from either side of the back seam. This section will stay open to allow us to join the 2 sides of the elastic after the rest of the back waistband has been sewn into place. So we'll sew from the side seam up to the first chalk mark, leave the middle section open, then start sewing again at the second chalk mark up to the other side seam. Starting at the stitch line on the back of the front waistband, sew along the bottom of the back waistband with a straight stitch, starting with a back stitch, 1 mm or 2 away from the folded edge. Keep sewing until you meet the first chalk mark and end with a back stitch. Then leave the middle section open and start sewing again at the second chalk mark with a back stitch and carry on sewing along the edge of the fold until you meet the stitch line at the other side of the front waistband and end with a back stitch. The finished result should look like this from the outside and like this from the inside and like this at the centre back with a small section left open. Then give both the front and back waistband a really good press with your iron using plenty of steam and pressure. Now use the safety pins at the ends of the elastic to wiggle the elastic through the waistband until you can pull the safety pin and the end of the elastic out through the hole we left at the centre back. Be really careful to keep the elastic flat as you do this so that it doesn't twist inside the channel, and repeat for both sides so you have the 2 ends of the elastic facing each other at the opening like this, and very carefully remove the safety pins. Then bring the end of one of the pieces of elastic to overlap the other by 2 cm and pin securely into place. And we're going to sew the 2 pieces together right down the middle. Pull the elastic away from the trousers a little to give you a bit more space to sew, then sew the 2 pieces together down the centre of the overlap using a straight stitch with a length of 2.5 and a back stitch at the beginning and the end. So it should look like this. Then we're going to add another 2 lines of stitching 5 mm away from either side of the first line to make sure the join is really secure. Use a straight stitch as before with a back stitch at the beginning and the end, and match the edge of your presser foot to the first line of stitching as you go as a guide. So it should now look like this. Then pull the back waistband back over the elastic so it's sitting neatly inside the channel and as flat as possible at the back open section, and pin into place, matching the back seam on the fold with the back seam on the trousers below it. And we're going to add a stitch to close up the open section, overlapping the existing stitch line slightly at either end to keep it secure. Start with a back stitch onto the existing stitching just before the beginning of the opening, then use a straight stitch with a length of 2.5 to sew 1 mm or 2 away from the folded edge until you go just past the end of the opening to overlap the existing stitches on the other side and end with a back stitch. So it should look like this. Then work the gathers in the back waistband along the elastic so that the volume is evenly distributed along the length. And if it's sitting correctly, you should be able to feel the point where the ends of the elastic overlap, sitting underneath the seam at the centre back. And to finish, we'll add a line of stitches directly through this seam to keep everything sitting neatly and stop the elastic twisting when we wear the piece. Starting at the top of the waistband with a back stitch, use a straight stitch with a length of 2.5, sewing through all the layers and aiming for your stitches to fall directly into the groove of the centre back seam, up until you reach the stitching at the bottom of the back waistband and end with a back stitch. So it should look like this and like this from the other side. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy having a play with this alternative waistband technique for the palazzo pants. And I'd love to see how you get on with it, so please do tag me in your photos. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sasha__Starlight, and you can use the hashtag Starlight Palazzos for this project. This is the first time I've released a hack method for one of my sewing patterns, so if there's any variations you'd like to see on my other designs, do let me know in the comments. And as a little sneak peek, my next pattern release will be for this swooshy, dramatic and adjustable multi-way dress. But for now, I hope your new elasticated palazzo pants bring you all the joy for many years to come, and I'll see you next time.